First of all, this is great. Thank you. I think I want to go back to you, Mike, though, to get us moving, because you gave us two examples of times where issues came up and you had to make a decision, right? One was where the younger student, the freshman didn't feel like he could belong if you allowed women singing, and the other one is you were clear on some level as to what is included and what is not included in Israel, even though you have a whole big gray area. So I think the question I would put back to you is, well, how do you make those decisions? And who is involved in making those decisions? Is it a top-down? Is it a group? Is it clear from your direction? Like, how does that happen? And then if you want to share, go further with that from one of the other panelists in terms of your institutions.
So it's easy to tell stories. It's hard to start to answer those questions. Someone said something today that, I think, Mark, actually, you said that pluralism was that everyone was unsatisfied? Equally dissatisfied. So, sometimes we joke that pluralism is being absolutely committed to not being committed to anything. But that's actually not where we stand. The way that we talk about this with students and with our board is that it's about three things. First is that pluralism is about tension. And so it's not about making it easy, about making people comfortable. It's about forcing people to live in tension. So I don't think it's easy, for example, to have, Orthodox students who just got back from Israel, a year kind of in yeshiva, sitting together with Reform Jews who don't even know what the word yeshiva means. And we can't really ask either of those students to feel comfortable. We need to ask them to be committed enough to the larger community that they're willing to give up some of their own comfort. The second thing that we think about is we're trying to create an operating system on which the largest number of Jews can play. So it has to be broad enough that it's compatible, but it can't do everything, right? An operating system that does everything is ultimately going to do nothing. And so the way that we end up defining these things, the last meta comment I want to make about this is that it's constantly changing, that I think pluralism is contextual. So I was doing some work with the Hillel at Washington University, and the student said, "What's your take on pluralism?" And at WashU, the big fight at WashU Hillel was, do we say hamotzi, or do we sing, "We give thanks to God for bread"? And at Penn, the big fights about pluralism are kol isha and a woman singing in public. So obviously, those things change based on the context, who's involved. But basically, what we end up doing is we try to extrapolate what are the core Jewish values, and not from a legal perspective, even though personally Jewish law has a very important role in my life, but from a kind of historical, civilizational, cultural context. What are the essential Jewish principles? So that's, for example, where Israel comes in. So having some kind of positive relationship with Israel is a requirement for Hillel. That's one of the decisions we've made. So the boundary line for us is things on the very left that undermine Israel's right to exist, whether it's material or ideological, but it's not being critical of Israel, but it's things that undermine Israel as a Jewish state within safe, secure borders, right? With religion, I think you mentioned this also, where it's a zero-sum game. No matter who we include on one side, we exclude somebody on the other side. And so the principle is we're trying to find the best fit line down the middle and then to communicate. So I think the right way we do pluralism with that kid who came back from yeshiva is not to say you have no place at the Hillel barbecue. It's certainly not to say women have no place singing, but essentially we offer parallel space so that they can opt, people essentially on the far left and the far right, in those situations where we're all together, have to opt out. So this is always a funny one. We have a Hillel downtown party, which is like supposed to be a frat party for Jewish kids. And then every year the Orthodox kids say, but you can't have mixed dancing at a frat party for Jewish kids. So what we have is we have an area upstairs usually if people don't want to dance, and then it's all sorts of mixed dancing. There's tzitzit flying everywhere. But for the few Orthodox kids who don't want to mix dance, they're hanging out upstairs. So we offer ways to be there, but to opt into safe space.
So it's interesting, the story you're telling, and I'm going to challenge not the sort of interesting side and the importance of it, but I'm not sure that this is a story about pluralism. It sounds to me like this is a story about hegemony, a story about authenticity. and about who gets to decide for when, and for whom. And I'm not undermining the importance of having these conversations, but I'm wondering if that's really what this is a conversation about. I mean, the kid who comes and says, you can't do this because it impacts me personally, that's probably a story about the individual learning to grow into an adult, right? That's a childish statement as opposed to a more adult statement that says, if it's not for me, law of 2 feet, I walk out the door, instead of the whole world rotates around me. The story of the, but when it becomes on this broader statement about, can we have a conversation about kolisha? Kolisha is someone is going to win and someone's going to lose, right? It's going to be one way or another way. One way satisfies a particular individual or group's need and dissatisfies, right? Fundamentally dissatisfies, right? Because the other story could, of course, be a kid came to the concert and said, how come only men are singing? I refuse to stay if only men are singing and I can't hear a woman's voice, right? We tend not to tell pluralism stories about they showed up and said, where's my treif, right? As opposed to why do I have to eat at the kosher table or why is it only kosher? And I'm surfacing it here because I think this really does get at the core, I mean, essentially what you said, Or, at the beginning, that maybe in a real way, pluralism as a conversation, as a topic in the Jewish community, is about finding ways to bring the halachically oriented and committed into deep conversation with those who are differently committed or understand halachically different in ways that aren't only combative or in which we sort of nod and publicly acknowledge that that's okay as long as you do it in your space. Right? You can come to the party but go there. Is that really a pluralism story, or is it, at the risk of using a very sort of edgy word, is it a discrimination story? Is it a segregation story, right? And I'm not pushing you negatively in that way, but I'm curious about that and be curious about what others here think along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that it is a segregation story and it's a pluralism story. And if every pluralism story is always a happy ending, I would submit it's not pluralism at all. Right? And we have to be very careful because, Michael, when you talk about we try and get them to live with tension, that's great, but we'd also have to be honest. I don't know everyone here, but I know everyone here at least a little bit. We're all very comfortable with tension. Tension is our comfort zone, so who are we kidding? We throw around the word tension because it makes us comfortable. Living with that tension is every bit as comforting to a certain religious or intellectual personality as absolute clarity is. This has nothing to do with all the terms we use to try and define the pluralism, because the definition happens from the inside. Every human being, from the person you think of as the most obnoxious anti-pluralist to the most darling pluralist you want to hug and kiss, is all looking for the exact same thing, a sense of coherence and meaning in life. Every single, because that's human. And then we have some weird Jewish overlay that we put on a fundamentally human conversation and wonder why people go, what are you doing? The real issue is, do we have any Jewish tools to help people navigate that fundamental human question? How do I create a sense of coherence on the inside, knowing that at some level, yes, I will have to grow up and understand that my insides are not synonymous with all of existence? Even the terms the far left and the far right, which we use so casually, far left and far right presumes there's a center. Where's the center? This actually was a moment at which I almost left Klau about 8 years ago. We had a board meeting. It was a great board meeting. I remember it was at the Harmony Club. You talk about a Jewish institution that no demographer scores. The Harmony Club is a Jewish institution. I understand that the custodians of Jewish culture, the rabbis, the educators, love to give it a 0. But if you could wake up the founders of that institution, they were every bit as committed and felt every bit as in touch with the Jewishness of the Harmony Club, including naming it the Harmony Club, as the founders of this shul. So let's not kid ourselves. And people kept talking about outreach this and outreach that. And I finally said, okay, here's the deal. If all of you, that was my board, want me to sit at the head of this table, I don't want us to ever use the word outreach again. And they were like, what do you mean? Isn't that a big piece of what we do? I said, look, this may just be my shtick because the resonance for me is in Hebrew. Every time people use the term outreach, I hear kiruv, And of course, the animating premise of kiruv is that the person at whom you are looking is rachok, that they're far away. What are they far from? Typically, what we mean is they're far from doing it the way we like to do it, which means in the name of a 3,000-year-old tradition filled with wisdom that's meant to help people become who they most need to be, we make it into a little set of practices to try and convert them into becoming littler versions of ourselves. It seems to me that the real work of pluralism goes on when we fundamentally accept that 95% of it, at the most serious level, is going on in here. Right? And that because it's contextual, you can actually say, as you did, Michael, absolutely I couldn't be there, though I could spend the rest of the afternoon trying to understand why absolutely you couldn't. And it would be really helpful to talk about, including if you honestly said, intellectually I actually could be with you, but here are the pragmatic reasons why I can't. And then help people understand, pragmatism's a funny thing. It's actually quite sacred. And as we begin to read the book of Vayikra, it's interesting to remember that. One person's pragmatism is another person's sacred order. It has nothing to do with whether or not that's absolutely opposed to Israel or absolutely committed to Israel. There's no doubt in my mind that the most principled person, the Jewish kids who are coming to you, are every bit as committed to Israel as something Jewish. I'm not saying a Jewish state, that's already loaded, even though I am actually. But as something Jewish, as the people who are at the very top of National Hillel's board saying, oh my God, this is the end of the Jewish people. Of course, the funny thing is they both go to meetings committed to what? The Jewish future, so the joke's on us. We would actually say, no, I'm absolutely unable to be there. For now, and for me. Right now, the people who tend to make absolute commitments never use the phrase for now or for themselves, and the people who talk about doing things for themselves and for now are terrified of making any absolute commitments. When we bridge that gap, we'll have a healthy community.
Where do you go from there?